Hey folks, we're just giving everyone a few seconds to log in before we get started. While you wait, there's some information in the chat about how you can buy Meredith and ALOK's books and how you can get $5 off our featured book tonight, Fairest. So look for the coupon code in the chat. All right, good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to host tonight's event with Meredith Talusan, presenting her new book, Fairest. She'll be talking with ALOK Vadinen, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone for making this happen and to all of you for showing up. Greenlight storefronts are currently closed and locked, but our community is still here. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. First, you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see or hear you. They can see your name over in our attendee list, and they'll see your name when you comment in chat or ask questions in our audience Q&A. If you scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see a couple icons we'll be using for tonight's event. One of them is labeled chat. If you open up that window, you can say hello to the authors, comment on the reading with each other, and provide applause after the reading or during high points in the conversation. There's also an icon down here labeled Q&A. That is where we'll be pulling questions from during the audience Q&A portion at the end of the event. You can type your question there at any point during tonight's event, and if you see someone else's question that you really like, you can go ahead and upvote it, and that'll appear at the top of our queue as we're pulling questions to ask Meredith. We are recording tonight's event, so look for video or audio versions on our website and social media channels later on. Tonight's featured book, Fairest, is available for sale from greenlightbookstore.com. Though our stores are closed, we're working with our supplier warehouse for fast direct-to-home shipping. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. And we're offering $5 off on the featured book when you purchase it from Greenlight's website this week. Look for that coupon code in the chat. Our interviewer for this evening is ALOK Vadinen. They are a gender non-conforming writer and performance artist. Their eclectic style and poetic challenge to the gender binary have been internationally renowned. As a mixed media artist, ALOK uses poetry, comedy, performance, lecture, drag, sound art, fashion design, self-portraiture, and social media to explore themes of gender, race, trauma, belonging, and the human condition. They're the author of Them in Public and Beyond the Gender Binary. In 2019, they were selected as one of NBC's Pride 50 and Out Magazine's Out 100. They'll be speaking with our featured author, Meredith Talusan. She is an award-winning author and journalist who is the founding executive editor of Them, Condé Nast's LGBTQ+ digital platform, where she is now contributing editor. She's contributed to other books, including the New York Times bestseller, Not That Bad, edited by Roxane Gay, Nasty Women, and Burn It Down. She writes frequently for the New York Times, The Guardian, The Atlantic, Wired, Condé Nast Traveler, and many other publications. She lives in the Western Catskills with her spouse and rescue mutt. Her new book, Fairest, is a coming-of-age story about a precocious boy with albinism, a sun child from a rural Philippine village who would grow up to become a woman in America. Her memoir breaks new ground with an utterly singular perspective, probing trans experience in all its complexity through rich insight and indelible prose. Meredith is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then she'll be talking with ALOK and with all of you. Meredith, please take it away.
Hi, everybody. It feels strange not to be able to see all of you, but I know that you're there. And because I'm albino, it's actually very hard for me to read the chat. But I promise I will go through every single chat message after this launch, because I am imagining all of you out there. I love Greenlight Books. I've been to so many readings there. Some of the most memorable readings I've been in have been at Greenlight. I talked about this on Twitter, like Lydia Yuknevich and Celeste Ng. And so it's just an incredible honor to be doing my launch for Fairest. So what I decided to do today was to read from the prologue from the very beginning, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to read the version that appeared in the New York Times today, just because it feels more self-contained, and and there's something about that I really like aesthetically, and so that's what I'm going to do. But this is basically this essay, which came up today in the New York Times opinion section, which was really fortunate. I was really happy that happened. Is adapted from the very beginning of the book, my prologue, and they titled it "On Being a Trans Woman and Giving Up Makeup," with makeup as 2 words. I walked briskly through Harvard's campus, but slowed down as I reached the grassy courtyard, where a crowd of mostly gay men and a smattering of women milled about under a giant white tent. It was a drizzly May afternoon in 2017, 20 years since I graduated, and I was there to attend the college's queer alumni reception. Yet suddenly, I felt unprepared to see people who had never met me as a woman. I took a breath, then ambled over to the drinks, where I soon spied an old friend named Sean. "I'm Meredith," I said, when he waved hello, to make sure he knew my new name. "I remember you," he replied. "You look the same." I tried not to flinch. I'd expected college friends to recognize me, but not to say I hadn't changed, given the sacrifices I'd made to transition. Though come to think of it, I'd recently cut my hair in a short bob and wasn't wearing makeup. I had on a loose gray jumpsuit someone of any gender could wear. It was actually a look I could have easily sported as a gay undergrad. I realized that Sean's assessment was accurate, probably even intended as a compliment, especially since I looked younger than my age. Hormones had given me a second puberty, and my Filipino bone structure under my white albino skin was still undeniably distinctive. Yet the idea of me looking the same still felt at odds with the image I'd long held of myself. I was obsessed with femininity for years after I transitioned in 2001. I reveled in using cosmetics and flattering outfits to look both more convincing and attractive as a woman, forms of expression my old gender denied me. But apart from how much time it took to dress up this way, I also grew weary of the awful feeling that my beauty was always on the verge of collapse, that a mere rub of the eyes or touching of the cloth would ruin the effect. Also, the attention from men that at first felt intoxicating turned oppressive over time, especially when it came with the assumption that I wasn't very smart. So I stopped wearing so much makeup after half a decade, then often no makeup at all, once estrogen had softened my features enough that I felt safe from people on the street calling me a man. More comfortable clothes steadily replaced my fussy dresses and high heels, but these changes were so gradual that until Sean's reaction, I hadn't fully grasped how far I'd swung in the other direction. I'd been so much more concerned about feeling at ease with myself than looking conventionally feminine at reunion, and so I hadn't treated it as an occasion to gussy up. After I found a few more friends and made plans to see people later, I walked away from that courtyard to drop off my bag at Adams, my old house where Harvard was putting me up for the weekend. I entered the room I'd been assigned and went over to put sheets on the single twin bed when I caught a glint in the corner of my eye. I turned to face my reflection in the mirror through the open bathroom door. Those words, "You look the same," lingered in my mind. and I suddenly wondered whether I could imagine myself with a man's face, knowing that for many years now, I'd seen a woman's face when I looked in the mirror, and it had taken so much sacrifice to bring that reflection into being. I might have to let go of the need to be feminine at all times. I might have let go of the need to be feminine at all times, but I wasn't sure it would be healthy to actively envision myself as male. Yet being in that place where I had spent so much time in my former gender, I felt the urge to reconcile the man I was then with the woman I had become, and so lingered in front of that glass. I imagined my prominent brow, my angular jaw, my flat chin, the features that made me fear I would always be perceived as a man when I started transitioning. I took one step forward and then another when I noticed that my jaw was no longer so sharply angled, as fat had settled on that part of my face and turned what was once a line into a shallow curve. Another step, and I noticed my rosy cheeks. Another, the natural pucker of my lips. By the time I got close and leaned against the sink, I found myself unable to maintain the sensation that the face in front of me was a man's, even though I understood what Sean meant when he'd said that I looked the same. I hardened the muscles of my face, furrowed my brow, and clenched my lips into a hard line. The impression I got was not of a man, but of a woman pretending to be a man, as my features softened back to their original expression. Maybe my mind was protecting me from my male past, and I wondered to what degree the image in front of me conformed to what was real. But I also reminded myself that there is no single objective truth, that reality is so much more malleable than people make it out to be, that the first step in making something real is believing it could be real, that my very presence in front of this mirror, in the school, in the world, was itself proof of the power of belief in a reality that seemed entirely far-fetched. When I began transitioning, I perceived the reality of womanhood only from outside and felt the need to embody an idealized femininity to feel like a woman among women. But over time, I've come to realize that every woman, whether transgender or cisgender, evolves a unique perception of herself, one that need not conform to any specific model of what a woman should be. Whether I grow my hair or cut it short, wear makeup every day or none at all, it would be an expression of the specific woman I am at that point in time. Making those judgments for myself is at the core of why I transitioned to be a woman in the first place, to express my gender how I want to, regardless of society's expectations. In that dorm bathroom, I touched the mirror and felt the truth of its material surface, how it was a piece of glass with beveled edges, coated in silver that had oxidized in places, creating black spots like little islands on the edge of the frame. It was eerie to be on the other side of that glass, when I once stared at my reflection in a mirror, so much like this one, and believed I could never become the beautiful woman in my fantasies. But in that place where I had once been a man, I came to know for sure, in a way I didn't before, that my history did not conflict with the reality of my womanhood. I was a woman, no matter how I looked or acted, because as long as gender matters to the world, I will always be a woman to myself. Thank you for listening to that.
Thanks so much, Meredith. Welcome everyone who's here. My name's ALOK, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Meredith. I read this book a couple of months ago, and it still sticks with me. And I've been relishing and reading all of the amazing news reporting about it. And my first question is inspired by one of those reports. So you're on NPR, which is really like the kind of bastion of white cis liberalism in so many ways. And you were excited because the host said gender non-conforming trans feminine person. And I'm thrilled by that too, because I don't think I've really ever seen mainstream media ever say that. But it started to make me think a lot about the politics of legibility and how so often people see our identities as cumbersome whenever we elaborate them in their full extent. And so often we have to make approximations like I'm a woman, even though there's a asterisk there that's like, but actually, what is a woman anyways, you know?
Right.
So
Right.
I guess my first question for you is, in writing your book, how did you navigate the lurking gaze of sort of white cis imagination? Did you have a presumed audience when you were writing? Were you battling against how you felt like whiteness and cisness would read you? I want to hear more about how you were thinking about the gaze in your work.
I think that whenever I conceived of an audience for this book, it was primarily myself. It was really a book about my own self-exploration, you know, because a lot of what the book covers are periods in my life that, as I was living them, were either so chaotic or in some ways confusing, or I was just like really just going with the normative flow. So in certain ways, it was really difficult for me to self-reflect during those moments. And so one of the things that I realized in the early stages of, you know, of working on the book is like, hold on, like before I can actually explain my experience to anybody else, I actually have to sit down and dissect the minute details of it for myself. And so many of the moments that people talk about as really being really revelatory or honest or specific are just moments where I dug and dug and dug through the layers and layers of self-rationalization and you know, convenient explanation to get to, you know, to get to the experience of having lived those moments. And I think when you talk about, you know, when you talk about how the book is affected by the white cis liberal gaze, that's one of the ways in which I feel like it is really my effort. One of the ways in which I combat that gaze is through the specificity of storytelling. Because one of the things that I realized working on the book is that the first story, you know, like there was this pattern that emerged where the first draft of a scene or the first story or the first rendering of whatever it was that I was working on that was difficult always conformed to a trope, right? You know, like there was a point when my mom was the bad mom and my grandmother was like the fairy godmother figure who saved me. There were points where, you know, like there were points in the book where, you know, like where I was much more sort of like virulently anti, you know, sort of like I anti-gay society, right? And I think that one of the things that I realized as I was doing that is that it's not actually intuitive for people. You know, people think, oh, like I'm telling my own story, therefore it's true. But the fact is that, especially because there aren't that many trans stories, there aren't, you know, like a big storehouse of them, right? Like there aren't a ton of models, especially, you know, like when I was transitioning in the early 2000s. One of the things that I realized was that I was actually borrowing other people's stories rather than exploring my own story for myself. And it was in the process of doing that that I also, being myself, somebody who did not, you know, like who tries not to assume the white cisgender gaze, even though I do have proximity to it. That was how I was able to sort of like to excavate these layers that, you know, that didn't exist for me until I wrote the book.
I think that that's really powerful how you're talking about storytelling and specificity, because it's so often that these gazes monopolize the discourse of truth to justify themselves. So cis people will say, oh, well, you're a biological male. And it's always so funny because actually we're being more precise with biology. Biology refers to life matter. I can have a biological ear, I can have a biological toe, but you are reducing biology to genitalia because of heteronormativity, right? And so when we actually when we're writing with the kind of specificity and precision that they allege themselves as having, but they don't. And I think the biggest sort of counter to that is our storytelling, as you said. But that raises the question for me that I've been thinking about a lot. I've been reading a lot of the sexologists writing in the sort of 20th century and reading a lot of what trans patients were writing to sexologists. And it's interesting because, you know, sexology created so much language that has now descended into the trans experience, that the medical industrial complex has so deeply informed the ways that we know ourselves. And one of the difficult things with reading a lot of these exchanges is you see trans, intersex, gender variant people using the language of medicalization as a way to legitimize themselves. And then you begin to question, is this what they actually feel about themselves? Or is this what they're performing in order to get access to what they want? And I think it raises a larger question for me in transcendology, which is, how do we come to know ourselves outside of how other people see us? Is that even possible? And I think your book, in so many ways, for me, is exploring a lot of those themes. When we have that really poignant encounter between you and Barrett, where he's saying, I never really saw you, I don't see you as trans, or, you know, because you're Asian, I don't see you as Asian. And I think in so many ways, there's this struggle between how the world sees you and then how you see yourself. And then how you see yourself is actually informed by the world. So I guess I just want to hear a little bit about how this book for you, and as you're writing, as you're describing it, it seems like a very personal, therapeutic encounter as well. How you began to do that work of excavation, of self-perception outside of being mediated by how other people see you.
I actually wrote an article about this very issue, which has just appeared in Condé Nast Traveler among the slew of articles.
Oh, cool.
That appeared today, which is that one of the impulses that I had was to go someplace where I didn't know anybody, so that I didn't have to be responsible to anybody for anything that I wrote in the book. So I literally spent a month in the Lake Atitlan region of Guatemala, where I had never been, where I knew no one. I stayed alone at a hotel. The only people that I talked to were the staff. And it gave me the mental space to be able to find those moments and those resources to figure out, you know, all of these elements of my life that were going on. And I unfortunately don't think, at least my gut answer to the question of whether we can ever know ourselves outside of the people who are perceiving us, and my gut answer is no. My gut answer is that it's inevitable that it's a dynamic system. But because it's a dynamic system, I think that there's a lot of work that we as a society need to do in order to sort of make the questions like individuality, individual agency, choice, consent, you know, there's a lot of work that we need to do in order to make those concepts more nuanced than they currently are. Because, you know, because the fact of the matter is that a lot of the stories that we tell ourselves are stories that have been handed down to us, right? And that, and in certain ways, I mean, it's funny just because there was a point in which I compared the gay community to a church, right? You know, that it has all of these implicit rules or all of these ways in which you can violate them. And if you violate them, you'll be rejected, you'll be cast aside, right? So you have all of this incentive to follow, you know, the norms and the stories that people within a community tell. But as, you know, the trans community is coming to the fore and we're becoming, like a much more unified community. Our norms are becoming more, like are gelling, right? I think that is also a danger of that happening, right? Like we're able to mobilize, but at the same time, we can't pressure individuals who don't conform to the established narratives of how things are supposed to be, to follow those party lines, right? And I'm in this sort of, I feel like in certain ways I'm in this position where I've accumulated enough of a body of work and have shown myself sufficiently to be well-intentioned that there are certain ways in which one of the things that I've observed is that as a people have permitted me a certain amount of latitude in terms of not fully conforming to, to certain tropes of trans experience, right? And, again, and that's something that I value, but I also really think that, like one of the things that I think is really important, like for every trans person who's listening, who's watching or listening, is that try to tell your story to yourself and figure out, and at points where it conforms to the standard trans stories that are told, really ask yourself whether that's actually your story or whether it's just something that you assume about yourself because that's what you've heard, right? And I think
totally agree with you.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
we're
sorry.
Totally informed.
Yeah, the last thing I was going to say was that I think the fact that we both have proximity to other, cultural norms, to other geographies, to other constellations of gender, perhaps makes us more aware of those, like of the ways in which society pressures us than perhaps people who have primarily been raised and grown up in only one particular cultural context.
Absolutely, totally. I was just going to say, I feel like one of the strongest parts of your book for me was so often one of the tropes of trans narration is that trans women and trans feminine people have to be emblematic with truth, capital T truth. We have to reveal the truth of gender, of its construction, or the truth of patriarchy for trans exclusionary feminists. And we also have to know ourselves before we were even born. At this point, it's not even enough to say I was born this way. We have to say my genes were this way. We have to legitimize ourselves.
I was a zygote this way. It's less catchy.
We have to, and I found what I found most refreshing about your book was its maintenance of the multiplicity of truths. That on the one hand, you wanted to be a woman, but on the other hand, you're ambivalent about the category woman to begin with. That on the one hand, there's the ways that you're gendered in Filipino society, which is very different, the ways than you're gendered in the US. All these things are true at the same time. And so I think that what your book teaches me in so many ways is, of course, we're informed by these dominant discourses, but there is also a kernel of an otherwise that is simultaneous and alongside it. And that being non-binary is not actually just about gender. I think it's a rejection of the dualisms of kind of Western rationalism that require us to have oppositional truths, while rather than actually seeing truth as a more latticed structure that is weaved into each other. So I guess this leads into my next question, which is, I think, about stealthness, because one of the things that's particular to your story is you've lived many trans lives. You lived a life as a gender non-conforming queer man, and then you transitioned into a trans woman who was presumed as a cis woman, and then you transitioned to a non-binary person who a lot of people perceive as transmasculine. And
yes.
So you've had
I'm apparently femme, although I just think of it as COVID. Like my COVID haircut usually.
I wonder how COVID is affecting the politics of gender. Yeah. And I'm really interested
also,
because
I
one of the
points
that you make
because of you. I wanted to make sure that.
No, I'm glad you did.
I'm wearing a jumpsuit.
Oh, that's nice. Classic Meredith.
Yes.
I guess the question is about stealthness. And one of the things that I feel was so like just like stood out to me is when you wrote, I wanted to be a woman because I wanted other people to perceive my qualities through the lens of that gender. But having molded myself to their expectations, I now understood how much of an illusion gender was too. In so many ways, that is your bio. It's kind of your like a bridge life story in so many ways. But I guess I just wanted to hear more, you expound on that more. And in particular, I'm really interested in how that realization comes to be experienced of once you get access to this thing that you thought would be one thing, you realize it's actually something much more strange than you thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was this one line at the end of the New York Times piece that I anguished about, because it was something like, it was something along the lines of, I'm a woman regardless of how I look or act. And originally the line was, I'm a woman regardless of how I look or act because I will always be a woman to myself. And I was just like, wait, will I always be a woman to myself? Is that actually true? And then I was able to, at the end, sort of like near the end of my drafting process, like add the line that as long as gender matters to the world, I will always be a woman to myself, right? Just because I do feel like my life exists in a lot of ways, like especially my gendered life, in multiple planes, right? Like there is, and I feel like everybody's does, but I feel like mine, because of the fact that my experience makes me particularly sensitive to those dimensions, I very much, I very much like think about the ways in which, yes, like I'm totally comfortable being in this world a lot of the time as a woman and as a person who is presumed to be a woman. But at the same time, I would love to live in a world where we're not filtering people's qualities through the lens of binary gender, right? So it can simultaneously be the case that I like being a woman, I feel comfortable being a woman in the context that we're in, but that, in a larger sense, I would not, like I believe that gender is an illusion, right? And then we're not even really talking about the dynamics of gender when I'm in the Philippines, right? But that every single kind of like micro, that whatever context we're in, right? Like you have these, what would you call them, like microcultures of gender, microclimates of gender, like I think of San Francisco and the fact that in San Francisco, like the warmest month is November. Like I feel like when I'm in a party with lesbians and transmasculine people, like the climate of my gender is transmasculine. Like people often
You check your
perceive
forecast
me.
every day. What's my gender going to be? It
Yeah,
changes. There's going to be a
depending
drought
on
here.
what context it is, right? Or like if I, like when I went to the local library, like it was, like I got married recently, and I don't use my husband's last name, but the librarian was very like, oh honey, like you're, like you have to like add, and she, without me, like without my consent, added my husband's last name to my library card, right? There are these ways in which whatever context you're in, whatever environment you're in, you're gendered in a really specific way, right?
Right.
And so as a result of that, I feel like I always exist across multiple truths, right? And the book, in a lot of ways, is an attempt to create. I've been describing it as a prism. That it's prismatic, the structure that I'm creating, but it's not that the book has this sort of like, that the core of the book is like something hard. The core of the book is something that you enter, and it refracts in a different way depending on your point of view as you enter it. Which is part of the reason why I really enjoy talking to so many different people about the book, because if I talk to, like I talk to certain people, they emphasize the gender part, certain other people, the Filipino-ness part, race, disability, like class, all of these issues that the book brings up.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And for everyone who's listening, we're going to be taking Q&A from the crowd in the next 10 minutes. So if you want to write down your questions as they come up in the Q&A box at the bottom, then I'll be able to draw from them in 10 minutes. And then also just to echo, please purchase Meredith's incredible memoir. It's so important to support both local bookstores, thank you Greenlight Bookstore, as well as trans and non-binary writers of color like Meredith. Okay, I think your life story is compelling for so many reasons, but one of the ones that I think most people don't know about you is that you also studied visual art. And I think the way that you write is very visual, and the ways that you perceive visual culture is very textual. And one of the things that I think is interesting about trans writing is so often we're fatigued from the visual because people are just staring at us, gawking at us, prodding at us. And we often can't win in the visual realm because the visual realm is so often monopolized by cis-binary lens. Like the first kind of allocation that people make is it a boy or a girl? And so what I notice is that it's not that we're accepting defeat in the visual realm, because I mean, a lot of us are trying to push and provoke those lenses. But when we come into the textual, there's a kind of safety that there isn't often afforded elsewhere, because writing permits us a kind of creative mobility that we might not actually have elsewhere because of fear of violence, but also just the casual daily gendering that you succumb to living in the world. And so I wanted to hear a little bit, and then also you being a child star and having to read texts that you perform, writing a memoir in so many ways is kind of the antithesis of that, is actually writing your own narrative versus having to perform a script. And I know that watching you write this over the past few years, you took this extremely seriously. Like you would literally be like, I'm gone for the next 3 months, don't call me, like bye. You were just gone, and you put in so much meticulous energy into handwriting this, which I think people really need to know, that it was handwritten multiple times. And for me, that felt kind of ceremonial, to watch the ways in which you separate yourself from the public. You spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours physically writing something, then retyping it, then coming up with devices I've never even heard of to like do things on your lap with. I still don't understand. But I want to hear about what writing means to you as a method, and also what memoir means to you as a method. Because I think the way that you're engaging with memoir is very different than I see a lot of US white American memoir kind of writing happening. There's an appreciation in the ways that you recall memory as being visual and fictitious, but also recognizing that fiction is real. And you're teasing apart this kind of horrible bifurcation that's happened in publishing between fiction and memoir, and actually insisting on something else. So long-winded way of saying, I'd love to hear about what writing as a practice and a method brings up for you, and how your work is not memoir, or fails or transcends memoir.
Well, in terms of writing as a method, I feel like the handwriting has so many dimensions, right? Like, first of all, it brings me back to childhood, it makes me feel like myself in a way that I didn't before I started working on the book by hand, because when I started the book, or at least notes for the book, when I was at BuzzFeed in 2015, and I just didn't have time to work that way. But as soon as I worked by hand, it just all of those memories of years and years of schoolwork in the Philippines, like waking up at I used to wake up at 4 a.m, because school started at 7. This is a little glimpse into Meredith's brain. In the Philippines, where in the part of the Philippines that I assumed there were a lot of brownouts, and I'm a creature of habit, and I hated doing my homework at night because there was a chance that there would be a brownout and I wouldn't be able to do it. So what I did, but in the morning there was enough electricity. There was always enough electricity, so I could actually do my homework. And I was guaranteed to be able to do my homework at 4 a.m. So I woke up at 4 a.m. every day and did my homework from like 4 to 6:30. And I feel like that connects me to home. It connects me to, like a place of being that is very hard for me to access in the world that we're in, right? Like moving to the Catskills has definitely helped with that. Like realizing that an urban environment is not the place that I want to be in on a long-term basis, even though I still absolutely love visiting urban environments. Yeah, so that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that it allows me to just like to just really sort of like ponder. I've always done things too fast, like I've always been fast. Like I was pegged as a kid as like the precocious one, the fast one. And writing a book is not something that you can do fast, or it's something that you can do fast, but you can't do it as well, I don't think, if you do it fast, because it's so multifaceted, especially this type of book. Like there's maybe certain books that you can. So writing slows me down, definitely. And then in terms of, remind me what the other part of your question is, just so that.
Sure. How you're imagining memoir and how your work does or does not fit into how it's been pre-established.
So one of the other things that people don't know about me is that I I was a grad student. People know that I was a grad student in comparative literature, but one of the things that they don't know is that I've studied French reasonably intensely. And in the French memoir tradition, memoir and memoir and fiction are much more entwined, and there isn't this sort of, I feel like in America there's a certain hierarchy where like memoir is more popular but less prestigious, and that's not as true in a French context. So like I think a lot about there are authors that I love in French, like Georges Perec and Nathalie Sarraute, and then also people like Aimé Césaire, who who is a poet but whose poetry is like super autobiographical, and I'm sure I've been influenced by that learning, but I also feel like even intuitively, I feel like memory is more important than fact, right? Like what do you remember, what do you honestly remember, to me in a lot of ways is more important than what actually happened, because what you remember is what affected you, right? Like what you recall, like what is it, like etched in your brain is what made a difference in your life, right? Rather than what is actually factually the case. And because of the fact that I've done a fair amount of investigative journalism, one of the things that I was really careful to do when I was working on the memoir was I talked to people involved casually about the events that happened, but I didn't have a notebook and I didn't have a recorder, just because I didn't want to go into that mode where my, the effect of the event on me would, as a memory, would supersede the things that factually happened. So I'm sure, like there are errors in the, like errors in the book in terms of like objective fact, right? But in terms of how they affected my life, at least, circa 2018 to 2019, when, sort of like this book germinated, those are the truths that are in the book, right?
So now I'm going to turn to some of the questions that our amazing audience have for you. And this is maybe related to what we were just talking about, so I'll enter there. How did you choose which stories to include, which characters to include, and what not? And I'll bounce off of that as well and say, was there a draft of this that was larger? And how did you choose to edit out what stories and what characters to create this narrative?
Yeah. Oh, and if you wouldn't mind reading the names of the people, as an extrovert, I'm just sort of like trying to grasp like whatever.
This one is from Anthony.
Hi, Anthony. I think I might know the Anthony who it is, or although I know a couple. So I went back to my original book proposal, which was 150 words long. 150 pages long, not words, sorry. And actually, there was an entire section that happened while I was in high school that I just cut. It was like 75 or 80 pages that don't appear in the book, even though they're fully written. So that was one, and that was because upon, like, once I worked on the hard read section and reading them all together, it became clear that so many of the things that I was dealing with in high school were things that overlapped with the things that I was dealing with once I went to Harvard. And unfortunately, we live in a world where, people consider it vital that I have a section where I went to Harvard if I went to Harvard, but somehow it's not vital. It's not as vital that I relate living in Chino, California for 3 years before I went to Harvard, right? So picking between those two time periods in my life, that was one example of like a really significant section that I cut. But ultimately, really, the book for me didn't gel until I came up with the title, because it took me a really long time to figure out this title. I submitted the proposal February of, or maybe like January of 2018. And that was like in the middle of me forming with Philip Picardi, the editorial team for them. So I was like working nonstop. And I remember I had 10 days of holiday break. And I spent those 10 days, actually not all of them. I think I was with people for actual Christmas and New Year's, but I spent a significant number of days alone in a random hotel in Fairfield, Connecticut, where again, I didn't know anybody. And I would say like I spent a good couple of days just thinking about the title for the book. And then as soon, just because I was just like, this is about race and gender. Like what's about, what is a title that can encapsulate both race and gender equally without privileging one or the other, right? And then, once Fairest gelled in my head, and then also it has this other component of like fairness in terms of justice, that really kind of like organized the book so that all of the scenes are constellated around those three major concerns.
I want to combine two questions now. One from Bianca, which is, how do you navigate writing concretely about something you understand as an illusion? And I think that is related to a question from Ian that says, before the release of your memoir, did you ever worry that the country and the world was not ready for such a nuanced story?
The question of concreteness, despite illusion, the thing is that whatever concrete object that you make, it creates its own reality, right? So I wrote this book, like the bulk of it in 2018 and 2019. And it would have been a very different book had I written it, because I transitioned in 2000, I medically transitioned in 2002. I could have technically written this book at any point between 2002 and now. And I can tell you that every single year that if I had written this book in a different year, it would be a different book, right? But the fact that I wrote it now means that it creates its own reality for me and for other people. When, the fact that I've read it so many times means that the insights that are in it are concretized for me in a way that isn't true for, like other periods in my life, or if I had written the book at another time. That's just something that I've learned to accept, right? Like it's something that I've learned to accept as the nature of the elusiveness of experience, that we keep trying, that we strive to hold on to it, and writing as a method is a way for us to hold on to it, but it's ultimately elusive. But that's also part of what makes it so tantalizing, is the fact that we can never fully capture experience. But we can always try, and trying is itself like so powerful and challenging and invigorating, and certainly makes me so happy, and makes me so happy when I read other people making their attempts, and me gaining insights from those attempts. So all of that has been really wonderful. In terms of Ian's question about, was I ever concerned that people wouldn't get like the nuance of the book? Yes, definitely. That I was concerned about it, not necessarily in the sense of like, oh my God, like nobody's gonna read my book, because my goal, just so you know, my personal goal in terms of all of this is to be able to write my next book. Like that's my primary goal, is to be able to sustain myself as a writer and to be able to write my next book. From the perspective of like impact, and from the perspective of like readership, I feel like for me that is icing on the cake. Like I absolutely love and appreciate the fact that people are reading the book, the fact that people and close friends who have told me that they love the book, like that is incredibly meaningful for me. But but maybe partly because I'm a former academic who's used to like 9 people reading work that I've spent 6 months working on, right? I've never been really that focused on like the number of readers that I have, right? Apart from, apart from being able to sustain myself as a writer. So that part I wasn't concerned about. I was definitely concerned about the reaction, especially of the trans community. These days I'm not particularly, I'm not particularly concerned about cis people. But at the same time, I just sort of felt like, look, like you can't, you can't live life without risk, right? And you can't live, but also like you can't live life without, people can, or people do, but I guess like it's always been very hard for me to live life in a way that counters my own like deeply held impulses, right? And I think one of the deeply held impulses that I had was to write a book about trans experience that is specific to me, right? And not to any kind of assumed trans politics, right?
Right.
Which itself, of course, is highly political.
We're coming to a close, so I have one final question from Latasha about your proximity to whiteness. Can you talk about how your proximity to whiteness has indirectly impacted your writing, as well as, your access to certain writing or publishing opportunities? And I think that's also a great launch pad for us to really bring in race into this conversation. We've kind of alluded to it, but I'd love to foreground it at the end.
I mean, that's a super, super complicated question. I'm trying to think of an entry point. There was a New York Times review today, which was largely positive, and which I actually, like, regardless of whether or not it's positive or negative, I super, super appreciated the fact that, and forgive me, I'm like at this very moment, of course, like blanking on the reviewer's name. I apologize. But it was super nuanced around these issues of intersectionality. But it was also, it also talked about certain elements of my writing, and specifically, the reviewer said that that some of my sentences were inelegant, right? And as soon as inelegant.
Oh.
ALOK doesn't agree. But as soon as but in the context of the review, the thing that it made me think was, like, to what extent is my writing style colonized, right? Like, it's, and because of the fact that I'm writing in English, which is already a colonial language, it's actually like a really, really difficult issue, this sort of question of writing aesthetics. But the thing that it made me think of was, like, how do I work to decolonize my style, right? Because my style is, in certain ways, like, it's very, because of the fact that I have, this like French literature background, definitely influenced, even though I've studied, French African poets. And yet at the same time, Tagalog as a language is also, long-winded in its own way, right? So it really made me think about these elements of, like, of how being assumed to be white, how it's affected my ability or my desire to be able to read, like, all throughout college, like, I read mostly European authors, right? Like, it's only been in grad school where I really sort of like engaged with post-colonial literature. And I feel like that must have an effect, right? But then in terms of, in terms of the worlds that I've managed to have access to, I don't think there's any question that that being white passing has advantaged me, if only because, I was a former technical assistant at MIT, so my brain still kind of like operates in that mode. It's just like, statistically, it is just like there are very, very few Filipino people who come to the States at 15, like, live in poverty with abandoned, like, with parents who abandoned her and then transitioned, who end up in positions like me. And the fact that that is true, and I as the white passing person, despite the fact that I have a disability, am the person who has ended up in these, like, elite positions, means that white passing, and certainly absolutely cis passing, has something to do with that, right? But it's very hard to know other, like, what, like, that's as far as I've gotten, right? Because the other side of it is that, like, being, you know, like being white passing and cis passing has also like really deeply isolated me, and, you know, and made me feel really alone in my life. And it's possible that, you know, like another person within, you know, like with different, you know, with a different set of qualities would not have coped very well with being that way, right? Certainly, you know, not every, you know, like in terms of like other albino people that I've interacted with, there's just like such a range of, you know, their relationship to their white passing or to the color of their skin, that it's really difficult to say to specify the degree to which white passing has helped me, but it certainly has, right?
Great. Well, thanks so much, Meredith, and thank you everyone for your amazing questions. And the link to purchase Meredith's book is in the chat, and there's a $5 discount before 6/2, so make sure you take advantage of that.
And I'm going to beg, I hope that I have access to the chat, because I'm really looking forward to just sort of like seeing who's there and saying hi afterwards. And maybe we can have a separate Zoom call or something. I don't know. It's really special to have this launch event with Greenlight, and to just feel like Alok and I used to be roommates, so, you know, to just kind of feel like I'm chatting with
we would be
my old roommate,
sitting there chatting about
but
the
it also at the same time would have been really wonderful to be able to see all of your faces. So
Thank you so much, Meredith and Alok, for tonight's wonderful conversation, and thank all of you for coming out tonight and for your lovely words and chat and your thoughtful questions. A reminder that tonight's event has been recorded, so if you missed any part of it for any reason, or if you have friends who missed out, keep an eye out for that on our website and other social channels later on. And a reminder, again, that you can buy Meredith's book, Fairest, and Alok's book at greenlightbookstore.com. And you can get $5 off of Fairest with code Fairest by June 2nd. Thanks so much again, everyone. It was a lovely evening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye.
thank you, everybody. It's great to see you.